Right. Well, good morning, everybody. And for those of you that will be watching this on the recording, good afternoon or evening, wherever you happen to. Thanks for joining us. This is Mary Peabody. I'm a Community and Economic Development Specialist, University of Vermont Extension, and part of the Women in Agriculture National Learning Network, of which this webinar is part of our monthly series. And we are a national network of extension educators, farmers and ranchers, and technical assistance providers around the country who are looking to make farming a little bit easier for the women that make that their livelihood. So thank you for joining us. This month we've got a really important topic, and it's very timely because we're just transitioning from spring into summer. School is getting out, and every farm I know, the busyness index is ramped up to the red zone. So we're here to talk about farm safety, particularly as it pertains to children and youth on our farms. So a better topic I can't think of, and I know it's on the minds of all of the women that I work with. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We've got two speakers. I'm going to go ahead and read both of their introductions right now so that we can just transition right on in. I'm also going to ask those of you who are joining us to please type your email address into the chat box. If you would be so kind, we would send you a very short survey just to assess whether this was of interest to you and whether you have any other topics that you'd like to see in our monthly series. So if you wouldn't mind typing in your email address, I promise we will not bug you over much. So anyway, joining us today, we've got Sherry Burkus is the Education Director for Farm Safety for Just Kids. Starting with the organization in 1991, she initiated the first chapter system. She now develops educational material and programs that include brochures, fact sheets, demonstrations, displays, curriculum, activity ideas, lesson plans, and more. Sherry has past teaching experience in both middle and high schools in rural and urban settings. She grew up on a typical Iowa row crop and livestock farm outside of Adel, Iowa. Sherry's got a Master's of Education from Iowa State University and a specialist degree in adult education from Drake. She serves on numerous state and national ag safety and health initiatives. And Sherry will be sharing some tips and some resources for us in just a few minutes. But to kick us off today, we have Marilyn Adams joining us. And some of you may be familiar with that name. She's sort of been my heroine when it comes to farm safety for almost my entire extension career. In the fall of 1986, 11-year-old Keith Algreen suffocated in a gravity flow wagon of corn while helping with harvest on his parents' farm in rural Iowa. Months later, Keith's mother, Marilyn Adams, set out to help her daughter with an FFA project on farm safety. Their research revealed Keith wasn't the only one. Hundreds of kids die on farms every year. Compelled to action, Marilyn founded Farm Safety for Just Kids the following year in the hopes of preventing another tragedy. For over 25 years, Farm Safety for Just Kids has built upon the foundation laid by Marilyn. Farm Safety for Just Kids has come a long way since its early beginnings in Marilyn's spare room. The organization is now an international 501c3 nonprofit. Marilyn retired from the organization in June of 2012, and she's joining us today by a cell phone in her car en route to a family event, I'm thinking. So, Marilyn, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mary. You know, we were a very happy family, and October 15th, 1986 changed our lives completely. As you can see in the picture of our family, now one of the people in those pictures is missing. Our silly sixth grader who always handed me my seatbelt and who wore his life jacket when he ventured near the pond to catch frogs became a farm death statistic. And then our family had to deal with the long journey of recovery, and that's not easy. Yes, I did retire after 25 years of service, but I continue to serve on a few boards, which includes Farm Safety for Just Kids Board. And I like to know what's going on and give my 2 cents worth. But there's a lot of wonderful people that are taking good care of the children's farm safety movement, and so I don't have to be as involved. Now I share memories about Keith with our grandchildren. And I remember sitting by the east window looking out into the backyard and wishing I still had Keith's white daisies in a vase on the kitchen table. And I tell about Keith camping in an old weathered pickup with my brothers and their boys, and how he watched the gold markets after finding gold nuggets in the driveway. Then there's the story about the soggy little mole that Keith drowned out with a garden hose. So each one of the kids has their special story that they enjoy. We visualize Keith kicking the soccer ball up in the air and across the yard for hours. And I talk about how he liked to throw little rocks up in the air and tell younger kids that they're falling from the sky. I can almost see him planting trees out back with his stepfather. By the time he would reach the farthest point with the garden hose and had watered his last tree, he would throw the hose up over his shoulder and struggle to loop it around as he drug it back. Well, trying to deal with Keith's death in the long months and years after he left us is similar to his winding up that garden hose. The task gets done, but it isn't easy. It seems like a very concerted effort to just make it through one day at a time. And, there were days that a pick-me-up bouquet of roses would brighten my day, and other days that nothing would work. I think back at our last Sunday together. Keith led us to our pew, third row from the front on the left-hand side. Then, when it was time for the offering, I slipped him some change. He gave it to his sister Kim, then took $1 out of his pocket. But wouldn't you know, the silly little guy he was, he pulled the dollar on both ends so it made a popping sound, held it up to his lips, and kissed it goodbye. Then as he laid it in the collection plate, he was grinning from ear to ear. So he was your typical 11-year-old and really enjoyed life a lot. The sad part of our memories is something that we don't share with the grandkids very much. And I share them with you today because I was asked to talk about the impact on a family. Well, for the first year and a half, I couldn't even sit through an entire church service without crying. And by the time we began to sing the second verse of the first hymn, the tears commenced to flow. The songs and the stories about dying and going to heaven had all come true. And up to that point, they were stories that we believed, but you don't think about really having to deal with it. After Keith died, I felt miserable not sitting where we used to, and feeling even more heartbroken if I attempted to sit in the same pew. So there was an emptiness in my heart at church, and that's where I found myself missing Keith the most. I thought about him being candlelighter his last Sunday and tried to accept the fact that he wasn't there to receive communion or take his turn with collecting the offering. And even at times I pleaded with God to permit my son to walk in the door. And I would sit there and I would scold Keith through prayers and tell him he's been gone long enough. And I said, you've always done everything I ever told you. Now it's time for you to come home. So for me, it was just almost impossible to enjoy anything. Everywhere I went, he should have been there. And then there's an abundance of holidays. And I dreaded those days that we used to celebrate, especially Christmas. It wasn't even really enjoyable at Mom's anymore. The kids would all be laughing and having fun, and my daughters, Kim and Kelly, would be cutting up with their cousins, and while they're doing all that, I'm running off to a bedroom or a bathroom somewhere just so I could be alone to cry. And then my husband, Daryl, he'd be sitting with family members, and I'm sure he enjoyed everyone's wonderful cooking, but it was hard for me to enjoy anything. And I always wondered, how do other people live through this excruciating pain? Keith's friends and kids his age were everywhere I went. The grocery store, the school bus, the streets, every corner I turned, he should be there. And in the grocery store, I'd see mothers hollering at their kids and tugging on their arms and jerking them around. And their actions would trigger an extreme amount of exasperation inside of me. And my biggest question was, why did God choose me to live without my son? You know, and I'd always heard that he never gives you any more than you can handle. But I was feeling like this time he made a big mistake. And I'm sure anyone that has gone through what we've gone through has felt that same way. I was used to loving and, you know, having a lot of love and happiness in my life. And every day and every holiday now had turned a new page in my life without Keith. And that was really very tough to handle. And Daryl and my daughter Kim didn't talk about Keith as near as much as my daughter Kelly and I did. The girls parented their dad and me, and our roles had really changed. They did everything they could to ease our pain, and I should have been taking care of them, but I couldn't even take care of myself. So Keith's death took a toll on not only our immediate family, but our parents and our brothers and sisters and extended families, as well as our church family. I think back at when Daryl's dad passed away, Grandpa Meredith, and it was just a year after Keith's accident. And he had been carrying some guilt because he was sick the day Keith suffocated. He felt like he should have been the one that was out there helping instead of having Keith help. But I also remember how difficult it was for my parents to even go fishing in our pond without Keith, and how painful it was for Daryl to take Keith's calf to the sale barn because it was so hard for him to do Keith's chores. So, you know, the list goes on and on. I remember how the girls preferred to be with their friends, and you know, I also remember thinking mean things, like, how could you have let this happen? I loved him. He was my son. So the damn yous, the remember whens, the what ifs, and the whys overwhelmed me, and I felt empty inside and nauseated most of the time. And then I started thinking about the counselor's words. Only 10% of the families survive the loss of a child. And he told me, you have to keep up your guard. Always remember how important your family and marriage are. Don't ever lose sight of that. And it was almost like he was scolding me and reading my mind, because that was all happening. And he said it's going to take a lot of work, and all of you need to keep everything together. And I began to understand why Daryl and Kim were so quiet. And I also realized if anyone was going to be jerking the rug out from underneath my family, it was going to be me. And, you know, that's a real eye-opener. So after the shock started to wear off, I even began to find it medicinal to think about different ways to take my own life. That was the easy way out. That's when I went to talk to the counselor one last time. After I stopped rambling to him, his soft, caring words really penetrated me more than anything else he could have stated. He said, Marilyn, what you're experiencing is normal. And that word normal really woke me up. He said it's normal in the healing process. You just make sure you stop, regroup, and don't follow through with any of those notions. Even though it's difficult to believe now, time heals. Trust me. And those were almost like magic words for me, because it really helped. And I don't know if he could have said it any better than he did. So heeding to an expert assuring me that these thoughts were normal really eased my pain. So within these words, I began to feel a mission, a purpose. I wasn't sure what it was, but I I now found a true meaning to life. And I realized just how lucky I was to have a family who loved and needed me, and how thankful I was that they were understanding. So thanks to that counselor, I was encouraged to live again and find ways to calm my obsession to self-destruct. So after going home, I whispered a short thank you prayer, laid down on my bed, and closed my eyes. At that moment, I decided to take all my emotions, my love, anger, hate, and high energy bottled up inside me, and funnel it in a positive direction. My worst challenges turned out to be my greatest teachers. My faith became stronger. Day by day, happiness just finally somehow trickled back into my life. So this morning I've shared the impact on our family, mostly the impact on my life in this brief time with you today. One thing I have learned is if Mom isn't happy, no one is happy. And so the impact on me really surrounded my entire family. So with a lot of soul searching, I knew that it was my responsibility to turn things around. It was time to remember when Keith and I wished upon a star from the tailgate of the pickup. So let me give you the snapshot of where we are now, the positive outcome. I have a completely different perspective on life since Keith's death. Every time someone dies that Keith knew, I just feel in my heart that he has the great honor of greeting them at the door and showing them around. And yes, I believe there might be white daisies in heaven. It's really very easy for me to envision Keith enjoying a favorite fishing hole with his grandmas and his grandpas. So I guess one of the lessons is all of my experiences have taught me that our own individual lives are important and filled with meaning. I've bonded with many families that have experienced the same loss and are living with the same grief. I've rebonded with my own family, and I'm really happy that they waited for me. Sometimes they were patient, and sometimes not. So as painful as my son's death has been to me, it's also helped me grow. My faith has gone through a very strong test. In my search for peace, I've learned to accept all life experiences as a part of God's plan. I work diligently to take the negative things that happened in my life and try to overcome the effects. So it feels good to have finally gotten the strength to pick up pieces and find some new meanings in life. I now realize that I'm a special person with an important mission and have to experience the pains and the joys that will help me progress day by day. So that is just a real quick snapshot of Marilyn Adams' family having to deal with grief that every mother fears throughout their life. And so now I thank each and every one of you for the invitation to open the door to my life and share this gift of my personal recovery from a heart-wrenching experience. And now it's time for Sherry Burgess to tell you all about Farm Safety for Just Kids, since I didn't talk about that very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Marilyn, for sharing your story. And Sherry, I guess we're ready for you.
Okay. As Mary said, I am the education director at Farm Safety for Just Kids. I've been with the organization for about 22 years this year, so I've been around the majority of the years that the organization has been here. I grew up on a farm, and so I have a lot of those same values that agriculture has in growing up there. So today I'm going to do the kind of the boring part and talking about how agriculture and farming is a hazardous occupation, and depending on what statistics you look at is going to determine whether it's first, second, or third in the most dangerous occupations in the United States. We also know, just as Marilyn was talking about, it was her son that was injured, but we also know that parents and older people are also at risk. Parents, simply because they have the highest exposure rates, they are in a situation where they're exposed to the hazards more than any other group. So if you look at just simply numbers, you're going to find that the middle age between 20 and 50 have the most number of injuries and deaths, but they don't have the highest rates. Actually, the older farmers and the children have higher rates of injuries than parents. And we're going to spend most of our time today talking about children, but we also know that older people, because of some sensory loss and some decline in the body, that they are also at risk. But today we're going to be talking about children. We know that children are exposed to the same hazards as their parents are for basically three reasons. They are living within a hazardous environment. They are there in the farmstead, right where there's livestock, where there's tractors, where there's combines, all the dangerous things that put everybody at risk. They're living right there. They are also, a lot of times, accompanying working parents. So when those parents are working, because we don't have a lot of really good child care for kids that live on the farm, that a lot of times they're working with their parents. And also they're usually working at a very young age. When I put down agricultural youth workers, I'm talking about somebody that's working for hire. But we also know that children at a very young age are also working, doing things on the farm. And just to let you know, we are an organization that does believe that farm is a good place to grow up, and is also a place that you can learn a lot of responsibility and work. But we also believe that if you are working at whatever age, it needs to be age appropriate. And we'll get to that after a bit. But we're going to talk about some of the statistics and the data right now. We are not an organization that collects the data, but we use data from other sources, whether that be the USDA Ag Census or research that comes from CDC or NIOSH. We also read a lot of research articles. We depend on all these other agencies that feed us information so we can determine where the risks are and how to address those issues. So, what are those numbers? First of all, we know that there's a little over 2 million farms in the United States, and we know that there's a little over 1 million youth that live on those farms. We know that about half of them perform some type of farm work, and we know that there's also an additional 250,000 kids that are working in agricultural work. Some of that is migrant, some of it is just working for the neighbor or aunt, uncle, or somebody else, a neighbor in the community. So those are some of the numbers about the population that we're dealing with today. And so how many children are killed each year, or a fatality has happened to a child just like Keith in Marilyn's story? We know that there's a death approximately every 3 days. There's a little over 100 deaths a year. And the leading cause of those fatalities, first of all, are machinery. And that machinery includes tractors, combines, PTOs, skid steer loaders, whatever kind of machinery that there are. The main reason for that is because they are so powerful. And they're powerful because they are work machines. They are they have a lot of power in them, and if somebody gets caught in them, a lot of times it can be fatal. Marilyn didn't talk about how Keith was hurt, but he was caught in an gravity flow wagon incident, and he actually suffocated. He was helping in the fall with his stepfather, and he was supposed to be watching the wagon. Darrow, the stepfather, was not there, but for some reason Keith got into the corn and was sucked underneath. So that would be considered a machinery fatality. But we also know that motor vehicles, including ATVs, are deadly to kids, and also we know that drowning causes a lot of fatalities. Not only ponds, where we normally think of drownings, but there are also drownings that take place in manure pits and other water-related. If you were growing up in California, you were exposed to a lot of irrigation and canals where the water runs. And so those fatalities would be classified in that situation. Here in Iowa, since we don't have a lot of irrigations, we don't have a lot of canals, we have, though, a lot of ponds, and we have other water-related deaths that take place. And now we're going to talk about the injury rates that are taking place and the number of injuries that occur on the farm. As with other situations, we know that all injuries are somewhat declining. We would like to believe that a lot of that has to do with the educational level, but there are a lot of other things that take place, not only on the farm, but other places where the equipment is safer. So we know that the injuries are on decline. Within farm-related injuries, we know that all of the kids are going down except those that are under 10 years of age. These are the kids that are probably watching their parents or riding on the tractor or not in a work setting, but they are observers to the situation. So those very young kids, the rates are going up. We know that males are at higher risk than females. This is probably due to the exposure. Males are more likely to be out on the farm, they're more likely to be working, and so they are at a higher risk than the females. That somewhat changes as kids age, because we know that the youngest ages, those that are under 6, the female and male rates are about the same. That's because they're not in a work setting. As kids get older, they are working more and more, so that's why the males are going to be more at risk. As kids get into adolescence, the type of injuries to males and females somewhat changes. For instance, example would be where females may be at a higher risk than males is the equestrian injuries, and because the girls are riding at a greater extent than some of the boys. That isn't always true, but that is one of the reasons we see some of the females as they get into the later adolescence. Depending on the type of injuries, they may be at greater risk. We know that most of the kids that are having injuries, most of them are not working. They're bystanders or they're watching. So that means that a lot of those younger kids are not in a work setting, but they are injured. We also know that livestock operations have more injuries than crop operations. The reason for that is because a lot of the work that kids are doing, a lot of times it involves livestock. So that's why the farms themselves have more injuries that are taking place. If you'll notice over to the left-hand side where it talks about some of the flyers that you can obtain and download, notice the second one there is about a flyer, a fact sheet that comes from Marshfield Children's Center. That's the one that's the MCRF Center. If you will open that one up, you will see a chart that looks very similar to the one I have up on the screen. I think I've reduced some of the content. But if you look at the bolded section where it says the injury rate, and then clear over to the right is the household injury rate, notice what's happening to those rate numbers. They're going down, which is great. The only exception to that is the household injury rate. And by the way, the household injury rate, that means those kids that live on the farm. If you look at the first couple columns, they involved those kids that live on the farm, but also the working kids that fall into those injury rates. So that's why the two different columns. But the arrows show where the injury rates are gone down. Notice also how the number of injuries has gone down very nicely over the years, with the exception of this last year at 2012, where the household injury rates have gone up slightly, but not significantly. So a lot of people will say, well, yeah, but we don't have as many kids that are either living on a farm or working on a farm. That is true, and the numbers show that. But what we really look at are those injury rates, and that's the nice thing that shows. So pull up that fact sheet, and please use that along the way. We use it a lot, and it's updated every year. Our problem is, as you will know, there is some problems with funding at the federal level, and so I'm not sure if we're going to be able to have this too much longer after about a year or so. We'll see what happens at the federal level. Okay, so next slide shows where kids are injured, and as you probably have guessed, because we have most farms in the Midwest, we have a lot of farms in all the areas, but because of the amount that we have in the Midwest, Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, Minnesota, that's where most of those injuries are taking place. But if you look at the rates are somewhat consistent all across the United States. So it's kind of interesting to see it in that pie graph where they're taking place, but just remember that the rates are pretty much the same. When you're talking about parts of the year, this graph is nicely showing where the injuries, or when the injuries are taking place. It would make sense when there's more work going on, that's when you're going to see the injuries. So that's why June, July, and August are the highest. Notice what happens in September, and then it drops, it goes back up in October because that's when harvest is taking place. This data comes from Iowa, but I would venture to guess that it's probably pretty typical across the United States. If harvest season are different, then that's where you're going to see the peaks like we see in Iowa in October. And this data is fairly old. We do not have the same type of data collection system in Iowa that we did several years ago. Okay, Marilyn talks about the emotional impact on her family, but I also want to say that there is an economic impact on a national level. There's about a $1 billion price tag for the youth ag injuries. The second one is the cost impact of fatalities. The reason that one is lower than the injuries is because, first of all, we don't have as many fatalities as we do injuries. And also, many of the injuries have a higher cost factor because those injuries involve hospitalizations. They involve all the treatment that comes as a result of those injuries. And remember that many of the injuries that take place in an ag setting are very serious. Many times, if you're caught in a piece of equipment, it may mean an amputation. It may mean very severe injuries, which are very costly. So just remember that yes, there is an emotional impact, but there's also a fairly high economic impact. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between children and what puts them at risk. Why a child that's young in nature, his characteristics put him at risk. For instance, he's very curious. So it's very easy for a young child, maybe 2 or 3, not understanding the dangers, to go over and touch something that is either hot or moving or whatever. They're curious. What's happening? So they put themselves at risk when they are curious. When we're talking about very young children, the best way to protect the very young children is to keep them away. Entice them into playing in a play yard that has a fence around it. Because of all these things, they don't have the strength to get out of some places. They don't have the size. They lack knowledge. They don't know what's dangerous. And a lot of times they're uncoordinated. So what you need to do with very young children, especially those that are 6 and under, keep them away from the dangers that are lurking out there. Put together a play yard, which is more enticing than being around the tractor. I can't stress that enough, that kids need to stay away at that very young age. But as they age, and so then they are in a work setting or doing things on the farm, then their characteristics change, and they also put themselves at risk because of those characteristics. They're risk takers. Those of you that have anybody that's in junior high, you know that the peer pressure is very strong. They oftentimes show off. And so if they have friends around, many times if there's an ATV available to ride on, they oftentimes, because of peer pressure, come on, let's just take a ride. And even if mom and dad have said there can be no more than one person on an ATV, if you've got another 12-year-old standing right there and say, come on, you can do it, a lot of times they do that. And they're also impulsive. They experiment. Many times they do things just because parents or grandparents tell them not to. Those are typical traits of adolescence, and so we just need to understand that they may be doing stuff that is not in the safest way. So that's why they need training. Training can come from parents, can come from employers, it can come from grandparents, it can come from aunts and uncles, wherever, or it can come in a formal setting. We know that there are tractor certifications classes out there that are put on by Extension and FFA instructors, which are excellent programs. And the reason that those were set up by the federal government was that they knew that kids ages 14 through 16 were working for farmers, and they needed some training. So that's the purpose of the tractor certification, is for ages 14 through 16. We also know that it's good for kids that are either older or younger, and many times they can take the same class, but they just can't be certified if they're younger than that. Even kids that grow up on a farm, which are probably safer than the kids that do not grow up on a farm, it's also good for them to take a certification class. So these are all characteristics of adolescence that put them at risk. So if you think about your own kids, think about when to assign them specific tasks, because not all kids are the same ability. They don't have the same knowledge. They don't have the same experience. If you will go to the fact sheet that I just talked to you about a little bit ago, they also have a set of guidelines, which are called the North American Guidelines for Agricultural Tasks. If you go to that same go to that fact sheet, and then there's a website on there, go into their guidelines, and that will help you as a parent or an employee or anybody that's in a supervisory position. It will help you understand when to assign specific tasks to kids. Not all 12-year-olds are the same, and I cannot give you a specific age when kids are capable of either driving a tractor, handling livestock, those type of things. It all depends on the uniqueness of that child, and so that's what the guidelines help you to do. And so that's a very good resource for many of you. Now, who are we as Farm Safety for Just Kids? We're located in Iowa, and we have resources that we hope are good for people all across the United States. All of our material now are on the website, so they're all electronic, they're all free. We also have outreach coordinators in 7 states, which are primarily college-age kids that go out and give programs. We also have chapters, which are volunteer groups that can give programs. So if you're wanting to know if your state or your region has either a coordinator or a chapter, go into our website. If you still can't find it, give us a call. And I've got a phone number on the very last slide. Give us a call and we can help you find that. If you're wanting to do some programs yourself, we have electronic resources, and as I indicated before, they are free. The main resources that we have are put into educational packets on specific topics: tractors, chemicals, machinery, ATVs. And these are lesson plans with background information. They also have puzzles that you can run off. They have fact sheets, and there's a PowerPoint in each one. Some of them are done in both Spanish and English, and so they will be helpful to you if you're doing a program, or you can use them with your own kids. Since everything is downloadable, and if you've got really young kids, we've got things in there for the very young kids and adolescents, so they will be helpful for you to run off coloring sheets or do an activity on, let's say, ATV safety or machinery, tractors, those type of things. So hopefully we have some information for you. Okay, and my last slide has to do with how to get a hold of us. So we have an 800 number. We also have a website, and hopefully you will call us and get information. I just had a guy call me yesterday. I don't even remember from what state, but he's saying, I need to do a lesson on, he was doing something on tractors. Where do I get the information? So I just walked him through it, and he said, oh, yeah, this is exactly what I need. But sometimes it just takes a little bit of help getting to the specific resources. So with that said, I'm going to be quiet now, and if you've got questions, I'm reading some of them. Any questions for Sherry? What is the most impactful safety demonstration she has seen? Because we are an organization that started with a gravity flow incident, probably one of the best ones that we use is a gravity flow wagon. And we have had those in the past, but if you're wanting kids to do something, I would suggest you even have them make something. You can make a gravity flow wagon out of a gallon milk jug with the lid on the bottom, turn it upside down, cut off the top, fill it up with corn, soybeans, rice, whatever you've got, and put a little guy in the top of it, and then have them count how many times it takes to for that kid to be submerged into the grain. Great demonstration, and that way, not only can they make something, because they always like to do things with their hands, but they can take it home and show Grandpa and Grandma. Hey, look, see what I learned today in a lesson? But there's lots of different demonstrations that you can use. If you will go to our educational packet, we've also got a set of demonstration ideas in there. So the lesson plans a lot of times will tell you where to get things and how to make stuff, and have the kids help you make it. Okay, questions. Mary, are we open for questions now?
We are, and I actually have one, and I will invite anybody else that has a question to go ahead and type it into the chat box. And first, let me just say thank you, Sherry, very much for giving your time today, and to Marilyn as well for that, really, for sharing that real-life story, because I think it brings it home to us just what the stakes are. So, but my question is, on your site, do you have a place where you could recommend tips on how to host groups at your farm, groups of school children in particular? I know that around the Northeast, the school year goes until mid-June, and so this is the time for field trips, and we get a lot of farmers saying, ooh, I have a class of first graders, or I have a class of fifth graders coming, what should I be doing?
Well, the educational packets that I referred to, they have a whole section on safety types of things if you were putting together a demonstration. So they're kind of like the things to think about, but also within the lesson plans, there are tips to things to think about when putting together those demonstrations.
Great. Thank you. And I have been to the website before. I can't recommend it highly enough. There are some great resources there, and we will make sure that we add the link along with the recording of this session, so that hopefully you will go ahead and share it with your colleagues and with your friends and neighbors as well, because that's why we do this.
Okay.
So Dina's got a question about Canada.
Oh, Canada? Well, because everything is on our website now, it should be accessible to anyone. So we no longer send out or sell resources. The reason we did that is because people were saying it's too expensive, both shipping and the products. So we just decided to do everything electronic, so everything is free to everyone. So all you have to do is go in there. And so we used to have coloring books, which people are still asking for them. And what we suggested now is to go in and find the sheets that are most appropriate for the topics that you're looking for. For instance, let's just say you're doing something on ATV. If you go into the ATV packet, you will find things that are for the very young kids, like a coloring page, but you'll also find activities, maybe crossword puzzle or Sudoku, things like that you can just run them off. And they come out very nice and clear, and the only cost you have then is just to copy them off and put them into a booklet form. So in Canada, you're going to do it the same way as if you were in Iowa or Vermont.
Right. So I don't see any other questions popping up, but I see that you do have your website and your phone number there. So I will just, as we're wrapping up, I will just remind people to make a note of those. Lisa has put the link up in the chat box, and it's live, so you can click on that and open it up and save it right now as a favorite page. And once again, I just want to say thank you, Sherry, for giving up your time. I'm sure it's a very busy time of year for you.
As always.
Is it ever not busy anymore? Really?
Right.
And so thank you so much for sharing something about your organization. It's a timely topic. We get lots and lots of calls here in Vermont. I know from farmers who have young children on the farm and who worry about keeping them safe all summer, and I love to be able to refer them to your site. So thank you for the work.
One thing I did not refer to, but I should, is that our general organization brochure that is another one of those files over to the left. Mm-hmm. It just kind of gives you background. I don't think there's anything in there that I didn't talk about, but it gives you an idea of who we are.
Great. So with that, I am ready to close out our May webinar. Thank you all for joining us. I know we had a couple folks who had to get out and do chores, so they sent me a note, and we will, if you did not yet leave your email address, please take a second and type it into the chat box. We will send you the link to a very short evaluation survey about this session, which you hopefully found useful. And in return, we will also share with you where the recording will live, along with a few other resources that we've identified. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's a busy time of year, I know, but this couldn't be a more important topic to kick off our summer. So thanks a lot, Sherry. Thank you, Lisa, for your help.
And everybody have a safe and healthy summer. Enjoy your kids.
Absolutely.
And thank you for including me, too. This was a real honor.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It was wonderful to hear both of you again. All right.